Story number 8. No muscle cars, but cars restored with muscles. All of my siblings, with the help of our father, learned to drive shortly after graduating from high school. I am the exception. When it was my turn for Dad to teach me, he sadly was too ill with bone cancer to try. Dad was sad that he could not teach me like the others, but because I knew I would soon be moving to Ottawa to study business education, I told him that it was okay. I reassured him that I would eventually learn at a later date. Dad died the following year. Once established in Ottawa, I did try, but I never did obtain that elusive driver's license. After failing my driver's test 8 times at the Ottawa License Bureau testing site, I decided it would be much safer for pedestrians if I did not drive. Actually, the last examiner that tested me, once I had crossed over 2 lanes of oncoming traffic, of which had a 6-inch cement median down the middle, and finally ended up on a nice lady's front lawn, became a very pale drive test examiner who said, "Sir, I suggest you never drive." I took his advice. Boy, that guy looked ill. I hope he went to see a doctor. Anyhow, as mentioned above, all of my siblings are fully licensed drivers, and our brother Bernard did even better, because he obtained a special license to drive a school bus. My brother Christopher, however, did not have a special license, but successfully obtained his driver's license shortly after he had graduated from high school. Chris adored automobiles. He used to purchase the Auto Trader magazine and drool over the beautiful vehicles within its pages. He would show me the pictures and say, "I would love to buy this one, or that one." He knew everything about cars. I, in comparison, did not. He could easily tell you what kind of engine was under the hood, and I could only tell you what color the car was, and sometimes I got that wrong. After getting his driver's license, he was able to drive Mom and Dad's car, the old Pontiac, or perhaps it was the Ford Rambler station wagon when it was free, and he would take me out for drives uptown or to Campbell's Bay. His dream, however, was to look for and buy his very own car, and soon. That summer, I believe it was the late 70s, or perhaps it was the early 80s, Chris was successful in obtaining his very first car. Chris, who was Uncle Eddie Gauthier's godson, had negotiated a good deal with our Uncle Eddie Gauthier to buy his second-hand car. In Christopher's view, it was the perfect car, because it was compact and it was his favorite color of blue. I know Chris enjoyed the freedom of having his very own car. He was never selfish with it either, because he would always offer rides or offer to run errands for anyone when the occasion arose. After several years of good life and good driving in this first car, Chris upgraded to another sportier car, a Ford Maverick. In this case, he traveled to Shawville, or perhaps it was Renfrew, to seek out this beauty. He met with the car dealership salesperson, and after some browsing, test driving, and negotiating, he drove home in his beautiful second-hand, but new to him, bright, shiny blue car. This Maverick was one of Christopher's prized possessions. Christopher drove this blue Maverick for many years and kept its motor and mechanics in good repair, but because of several salted road winters, the body of the car started to show some signs of rust and, oh gosh, rust holes as well. What to do? It was still a good car, and buying another at the time was not a financially viable option for Chris, so he decided then and there that he would research, study, and become an expert in auto body work. He had planned to fix up the body of his car himself. His goal was to make it look as new as possible. After studying magazines and books about how to go about auto body repair that winter, he felt he was ready to tackle the job in early spring, or as soon as the snow melted. On a bright, sunny April morning, Chris headed out to go shopping in nearby Shawville to buy the supplies he needed. This repair, he thought, would be his special birthday gift to give to himself. Chris had an April birthday. When he returned home that afternoon, he had a car trunk filled with pieces of sheet metal, pop rivets, a pop rivet gun, tubs of body filler, sheets of fiberglass cloth, fiberglass solution, a variety of different grades of sandpaper, a new sander, and of course a big can of beautiful blue paint. Over the next several weeks, Chris, in his spare time, got to work to repair and renew his car. I remember him with an electric grinder in his hands, tackling the back fenders, the front doors, and the area below the car's trunk. He meticulously ground away all rusty bits. On one fender that was particularly bad, I remember him taking so much rusted metal away that it left a 4 to 5 inch hole. I teased him and asked, "What are you going to do with that hole? Are you going to install new Batmobile secret defenses?" Chris laughed and said, "Very funny, there will be nothing Batman or Robin on this car. That is where I am going to install my Martian ray gun," he continued. In reality, he repaired that hole with a piece of strong sheet metal which he bent and shaped to fit nicely over it. This metal piece was attached to the car fender by way of several pop rivets. Next, he lathered a heap of body filler all over that newly fixed area. I bothered him again and now asked, "What are you doing now, Chris? Why are you putting sugar frosting all over your car's fender?" Chris smirked. "Icing is for cakes and not for cars, Chris," I continued. Chris then retorted, "Listen, Rick, if you don't let me concentrate on my work, I will bake you just like a cake in the oven." My brother Chris continued to examine and repair all rusty areas of his car's body. He replaced metal where it was needed with sheet metal or fiberglass, smoothed out the areas with body filler, then once dry, sanded this filler until it was so smooth that no one could tell that there ever was any past damage. Upon completion of this major task, next came the masking activities. By using old newspaper and mounds of masking tape, Chris diligently covered all areas of his car that were not to receive any of the beautiful new blue paint. These areas included all windows, the tires, the chrome grille, the chrome bumpers, the radio aerial, and of course the hood ornament. After having his car now fully prepared for paint, he found and set up our father's good old paint sprayer and air compressor. He carefully mixed the paint with paint thinner to achieve the perfect consistency. He dressed himself in old paint clothes, double-checked all his finished bodywork, and then yelled to me, "Plug in the compressor, Rick, and get out of the way, unless you want to look like a blue Smurf." I backed away, and off Chris went with that can of beautiful blue paint, now spraying out like a fine mist from its nozzle. Chris kept a steady arm and moved the spray in horizontal motions to cover the car with the first coat. He then switched to vertical arm motions and touched up any uneven sprayed areas, completely covering up all the new bodywork and the old faded original blue of his beloved Maverick car. Now it was time for cleanup and, more importantly, time for the paint to dry. Did we watch the paint dry? No. We went in for our supper, relaxed a bit playing games, and then went to bed. The next morning, Chris awoke excitedly, rushed his breakfast, and was out the door to go and check on the new paint. After a few key touch tests, he determined that the paint was perfectly dry. He then spent the first few hours carefully unmasking his car. It was so much fun to sit on the grass from a short distance away watching him work. He truly was like a worker bee gathering honey. I felt he looked like a little boy opening up a very special Christmas gift on Christmas morning. When he was nearly done, I called out, "Hey Chris, it is looking pretty good. Your car looks great. It looks brand new." Chris beamed and expressed that he was happy with the end result. Chris did not drive his car for the next 2 days though, because he told me that he wanted the paint to fully cure. We did sit inside it that day for a while to reminisce and recount all of what he had achieved to repair and renew this beautiful blue Ford Maverick. After a couple of days, Chris asked, "So would you like to take a spin in my car now that it is all done?" "Would I ever?" I responded. We drove down to Shawville and all eyes were on that snazzy new blue car. Christopher's eyes were on the road. My eyes were on him and I was smiling. Chris drove that special Maverick for many more years, but as we all know, automobiles do not last forever. There did come a time when the beautiful blue car had to be junked. As such, Chris was in the market to find himself another car. I asked him, "So what kind of car are you looking for now that you are a more mature young man?" "I don't know, Rick," Chris responded. "One thing I do know is that it has to be blue," he continued. That week, Chris traveled to Renfrew, Ontario, and spent the day browsing cars on all the dealership lots the town had to offer. He came across a car he really liked. This new beauty was nothing like his previous Maverick. This one was big and spacious and mimicked the fancy big cars driven by the stars of the nighttime soaps of the time, like Dallas and Dynasty. Once again, Chris did his due diligence of checking the car out completely, taking it for a good test drive, and then negotiating a great deal with the dealership. That afternoon, he proudly drove home in his new snazzy baby blue Chevrolet Monte Carlo. Christopher loved this new car. It drove smoothly on the road, and though it was a little bit more of a gas guzzler, it did not matter, because this was Christopher's new baby. The interior included all the gadgets of the day. The dash had so many dials, I felt that perhaps it was an airplane in a previous life. I especially remember the cassette tape player that came standard in this car. This technology was new for us because previously having music in a car only happened if I sang, and sang badly, or Chris whistled, and whistled beautifully. The interior finishes were also of a soft blue, and the seats were covered in the plushest velvet. The seats, of course, were blue. They had to be. Its trunk was huge. The trunk had a sunken area to hide the spare tire, but beyond that, Chris could have stored his motorcycle and his lawnmower in there, because it was so big. The car equally had a long and sleek hood. Under the hood was a motor so large it could have pulled an 18-wheeler log truck. Well, at least in my opinion. Please remember that I do not know a lot about cars. As mentioned before, I could only get the color correct, and that was only sometime. Anyhow, I do maintain a string of memories of Chris being very happy with this new Monte Carlo car, and of us going for many, many pleasurable drives everywhere in the Pontiac, and also across the Ottawa River to places like Renfrew and Pembroke and all towns and places in between. Like before, over nearly a decade of use and many happy drives, this car as well started to show its age. As before, Chris, knowing that he had the expertise, performed body work and repair to his Monte Carlo to keep it looking great. Over time, Chris built up a good reputation for himself in body repair. Several customers at Dad's business took notice of and complimented him on his abilities to completely restore his vehicles so well. On several occasions, a couple of patrons coming into our father's garage, Gauthier's Garage in Otter Lake, Quebec, hired Chris to repair their vehicles. Chris was excited to do the work because he loved this side trade, and it did indeed increase his revenue. Often these jobs were not as extensive as when he repaired his own cars, but he did great work nonetheless, and his clients left very satisfied. One particular job that I remember well was when Chris was hired to use his auto body work skills not to repair a car, but to completely renew a huge speedboat. I vividly remember teasing Chris once again as he was about to start the job. I asked, "Hey Chris, will you be making any big holes in this vehicle like before? If you do, this big boat may sink to the bottom of the lake," I continued. Chris laughed, and his comeback was quick and simple. He joked, "Rick, if you are not careful, I will sink you in a big lake. You'd make great fish food." My brother Christopher over the years owned and drove several vehicles. The two I best remember were his Maverick and his Monte Carlo. I was the happiest when he would suggest a drive to here or there, and we would always end up at a special place in this town or that. We would stop at any local chip stand for a burger, fries, and a Coke. We would stop simply to have an ice cream cone or a milkshake. We would stop at every garage sale possible and pick up new treasures to cherish. Additionally, on special drives, we would often end up at the Renfrew Drive-In Theater where many moviegoers would rubberneck as we drove in and park to check out Christopher's snazzy, rejuvenated cars. Chris had talent, and he made great use of his talent. Did Chris make a fortune in bodywork? No, he kept on working hard in Dad's garage alongside our brother Bernard. Did I become fish food? No. But the fish sure did like to bite my toes when we would go swimming up at Murray Lake. Again, thanks for listening to this little tribute to my brother Chris.